Hello, it's Vivian J, and welcome to Set the Stage. So how are we doing today, first off? If you haven't seen the last episode, you definitely should. So in the first one, I've introduced briefly of what this show dives into. So for the second episode, I'm pretty sure I sent a poll a few days ago on my Instagram. So if you haven't followed that, you definitely should. The link is in the description. I asked you if you guys would like to hear more of topics such as neurodivergence, communication, or creative arts, etc. And you people seem to pick most likely, it turns out it's between neurodivergence and communication. And let me tell you, those are such great choices. And I might as well dig into that. So first off, it's back to school season. So I know everybody has pretty much returned to school already. So if you're middle school, high school, or even college, I wish you lots of luck. And in the meantime, if this is your first time here, I encourage you to grab a snack, grab some water, because we have a lot to talk about today. So without further ado, let's begin. We are going to be doing a deep dive into some neurodivergence, some do's and don'ts. And here is why. So these are pretty much considered reminders, do's and don'ts for this one. It's like things to keep in mind and things what you should not do. But I think I'm going to start with the do's, and then we'll get on to the don'ts. And then for each one, I'm pretty much explaining briefly of why that's the case and all that stuff. So if you're an educator watching this video, or if you are a current student, whatever implies, it's never too late to know about what neurodivergence is. You've probably seen it a lot on social media, so I'm pretty sure those are pretty good tools, but I encourage to do some research. I encourage everyone to do some research, because neurodivergence can be lots of things, and it can range from ADHD, ADD, dyslexia, autism, and I'm pretty sure I've explained bits and pieces of that in my Like No Other documentary, and I encourage you, Glitter Angels, to check that out as well. So why don't we start with the first do? Do number 1, utilize source materials and do your research. And why is that important? Well, because here's what you do. You want to take notes of some tips that will help you become a better advocate for people with disabilities. Well, taking note as in what certain needs have to be met in order for them to thrive in a particular environment, and understand kind of their strengths and weaknesses and goals that can be achieved within blank amount of time. You might want to discuss those aspects among your team/group. And also, please avoid autism speaks, because the way they spoke about it is just not cutting it. So here are some great sources that you could use, such as Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, Autistic Inclusive Meets. I'll put those kind of links in the description so you could check those out for sure. And then you want to get to know different forms of neurodivergence too. So hence the term and definition, it's like it's not a one-way thing, obviously. So neuro as in brain, right? And divergent or divergence as in difference. So you want to get to know different types of neurodivergence and what it implies, whether it could be related to sensory, communication, processing, all those things. So that's a lot to think of, but it's true. That's the case. When you're looking into different forms of neurodivergence and getting to know how it functions within an individual or a group of individuals, so please note that not every single neurodivergent brain operates the same. So neurodivergence, the simplest way to think about it is that every brain functions differently, and that's okay. And now for the second do, please, please, please respect communication preferences. So if they say no or just do what's not expected, please understand their form of communication. Like, for example, there are kids out there that don't like to be touched. So if they don't like being touched, do not touch them. Like, let's say, for example, person A does not like shaking hands whatsoever. So it's best not to. So what do you do to fix that? Instead, you just say, "Hi, nice to meet you." You want to provide supplies that neurodivergent individuals can use, such as paper and pencil or any objects that kind of connect with who they are. Like, you might have heard of the term special interest. So that implies to anyone who identifies as ADHD or autistic. And it's a pretty common term in describing, well, at least it's much better than addressing as obsessions. But special interests, they can be thought of as more of like a particular object or interest, like a deep interest in a particular idea, thing, or it goes in a variety of ways. And it's one of those things that help us neurodivergent kids feel in control, like regulated. And those are great tools that help us. It just encourages us to navigate the world in our unique ways. So, yep, that's very important to know. For kids with autism, I'm pretty sure they may not do what is expected. Like, for example, when someone tries to give one a high five, they may not do that. So please note this. Every neurodivergent kid does things differently in their unique manner. And they're also fun, too. We'll dig into a little bit of that in a little more. Okay, everyone. So now that we've talked about using source materials and respecting communication preferences, so hopefully you've been keeping those in mind. The next do to think about and keep in mind is to take note of their accommodations and follow them. I'm speaking about this because at times with new environments for neurodivergent kids, it can be difficult for them to adjust at times. So it's best to kind of know some accommodation examples. Like I said, not every struggle runs the same among kids with autism, ADHD. Here's a couple things to know. So for autistic kids, they can be sensitive to bright lights, loud sounds, or certain textures in like clothes, tags, food. So here's some examples of accommodations that you can do. So for those who are sensory sensitive, like you could lower brightness of lights, lower background noise, switch rooms to a quiet setting, because that way it's a good practice on helping neurodivergent kids adjust to the environment and also what's going on in the classroom. And not just that, but also it could also apply to other situations too. But it all varies. Now that you're asking, like, oh, how can we best support you in what way? So now we get into the next do, which is another crucial point, which is to actively listen. So when I say that, I'm saying you want to take the time to get to know them in terms of who they are as a person. Like, let's say if someone is new to neurodivergence, let's say for me in this case, if someone is completely new to divergence, I could say, like, sometimes it takes me a little while to think through my thoughts and before I say something. So, and also if the autistic person is not really talking, as an advocate, you want to say, sometimes it takes this person a little while to blah, blah, blah. You are essentially speaking up for those who identify as neurodivergent. And that also implies to those who specifically correlates with nonverbal cases. Another thing you could do is to repeat the question if they don't get it the first time. It's because sometimes it takes neurodivergent kids a little while to answer. Like, for me, it does take me quite some time to answer certain questions. So the moment I hear it again, it's like, oh, okay, in what way? So it's like trying to get my brain to follow up with what's being asked me. And for questions wise, we'll get onto those in a little bit. So, yep, there's that. And then another do that you want to keep in mind is to check with them. And here's why. Because this is where meltdowns, overstimulation can happen at any time, so you never know. So one of the things to watch out for consist of signs of that the neurodivergent individual is overstimulated or overwhelmed. Ask them how they need support. As you're checking with them, you can kind of like read their body language and facial cues. It all varies on the situation and the case for those who identify as autistic. At times, kids, they need a moment to calm down, and it takes time to do that. Sure, you want what's best for your students, in theory, but also keep in mind that you want to support them in any way you can, because think of how much they've struggled throughout their life, like as a little kid, throughout years of school, all that stuff. I mean, I would know from speaking personal perspective, that kid that was achieving high A's and getting good grades all the time. Like, although that felt great to me, but in the long run, I felt brokenhearted on the other half, because the way that it happened with not having very many friends as a kid, it's like a trauma response. But I think you get the idea right now. So these are the do's that I've talked about, and then we're going to move on to the don'ts, the big do nots. There are things that you don't want to do around neurodivergent kids, and you should not. So the first don't is babying them. Treating them like babies is a huge no. And here's why. Because it actually hurts them than help them. Whenever you're babying someone, it causes more anxiety on them. It's like, I know that there are people that tend to do that, and for those that do, you have to really unlearn that, because that's not going to get you anywhere. Babying them is a no, and it's not going to get you anywhere. The second don't is crossing boundaries. If they seem like they're focused on something that's in front of them, they need to take more time to understand the question and decide how to answer. Like, let's say I'm in the midst of something, and then someone tries to kind of interrupt my workflow. You do not want to do that. Because at times when I feel that my brain is interrupted by something, it's hard for me to get back, because that's when my anxiety can go off the roof. Reason why kids may not understand, they may not answer certain questions right away, it's because they need to take more time to understand it and decide how to answer. And then a third don't is making assumptions. Because relying too much on assumptions, like even labels, it does make you harmful than helpful as a person. There are people out there that tend to dwell too much on assumptions, and again, that's another thing that you really have to unlearn. So, assumptions, they're not going to get you anywhere. It helps to ask. But I would say be careful of how you phrase certain questions, because it can really confuse them or throw them off. We do not use high functioning, low functioning. Those are stigmatizing. They're damaging. You do not want to dwell on those too much, because there are people that do, and you really have to unlearn that. Which brings me to another next point, which is the next don't is think too generally. Again, relying on general facts, they're not going to get you far. So you want to go beyond that. Please avoid using terms like normal. That is way too generic. That's too general for my brain. And even a professor that I know, Jonathan would know. He hates that word. I hate that word. So normal should be out of your vocabulary. When normal implies to something, it just doesn't feel right. And there are people that tend to say the wrong thing and still think normal is like the right thing to say. It is not. You have to go at least past the general facts, which brings me to another point, which is to do not, under any circumstances, use unnecessary questions or questions that have no clarification. Because, once again, as for someone who's on the spectrum, my brain does not work well with questions that do not have enough clarification. You have to be specific. Specific. S-P-E-C-I-F-I-C. Specific. You want to be specific on the questions you're asking to the neurodivergent person, and not just in school, but also in any social setting. You want to be specific, and you want to ask you don't want to just say closed-ended questions, but you want to kind of balance it out between little open and close questions. Like, sure, you could use who, what, where, when, why, how, but also, whenever a question is not specified, that can really confuse them. And your conversation is not going to be great. You do not want to cross their boundaries. You don't want to think too general. You don't want to make assumptions either. Instead, it helps to listen. Just actively listen. Spell that too. Active listening. A-C-T-I-V-E space L-I-S-T-E-N-I-N-G. Active listening. That is important. I'm pretty sure you get the idea at this point, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach me through social media. I'd be happy to answer more about neurodivergence questions, but please keep them specific in a way that can be answered fairly. Okay, so in conclusion, or should I say in summation, brains operate differently, and you have to be willing to accept neurodivergent kids for who they are, and give them the space and the freedom to be original and authentic, which has also been stated in my Like No Other film. What's out of your control is what they look like or how they navigate the world. But what is in your control is your perceptions and perspectives. Another thing is that the earlier you get to know neurodivergence, the more connections you can develop with them. It's like that saying, like, you're not in this by yourself. I'm here to support you in any way I can. Autism does not have to be fixed, and it can't be cured, and it's not a disease. It's a neurotype. I'm saying that as an example. It's like once you start knowing the person's situation, whether it's through a sibling, a friend, family member, the more connections you can develop with that person and also other kids who also identify as neurodivergent. I do remember vividly, there was one time where I was in my room by myself and calling my mom over the phone, crying. And I was like, does Chris know what it's like to work with a neurodivergent kid? And then she answers, oh, I'm sure she has. And she was right. Well, which makes sense, because she's been a professor for over 20 years at this point. And it did take me time in getting used to her upper level writing class, because I didn't have many experience in creative writing, but I still thrived in that class. Growing up on the autism spectrum has led me to having such a complicated relationship with myself. Well, because I felt that other kids would not share the same or similar interests as me, but there are some that do. And it's usually through, I don't want to say just events and classes, but also things that we agree on. That's a good way to start. Another thing to keep in mind is that neurodivergence is not only focused on how the brain functions, like how different brains function, but also the ideas that many neurodivergent individuals have a lot to offer to society. Despite what they've struggled with, whether in school or through life, they've had to work twice as hard to get to their goals and everything. I really hope we can keep that up. So I think of my autism as a gift, because at least that's what Ellen, my godmother, encouraged me to do, and I decided to follow that. I eventually have put my gift to my advantage, and it's been throughout college and throughout my creative practices and everything. There are times where I'm able to help find new adventures for the people around me, and that's amazing. Think of neurodivergence as like pros and cons balance. So like whenever there's a con, it has to be balanced by a pro. So it's like what can be made up for in terms of a particular struggle that eventually becomes into a form of strength. And I do that as a way to get out of the rigid thinking. I mean, what I've talked about in my Like No Other film is little bits and pieces of how growing up on the autism spectrum has kind of how it was hard for me. I so badly wanted to be like the other ones, like the other kids, just talking to people and making conversations, you name it all. I wasn't that girl that struggled with sensory problems. It's mostly just communication problems. It's not a personal failing, it was just a communication problem, which I was able to figure out. When I explain those kind of things to my professors, I feel that they would truly understand me in terms of where I come from, and that has helped me thrive even more and makes me appreciate them as not only a professor, but also as a human being. Whew! That's a lot thrown at you, but I really hope you take time in getting to know what neurodivergence is, because this may seem cliche but true, but kindness really does matter. Because you never know until you walk in their shoes. And that's where empathy comes in. All right, so that's pretty much it of what in terms of I talked about in this episode. This has been a lot of neurodivergence in terms of things that you should do, what you shouldn't do, and how it similarly relates to what I've been through. And I'm about to quote one of the things that was said in my interview. Well, not my interview, but in an interview that I conducted while filming for Like No Other. As Kent Menzel, he's a DePaul professor, as he said, you can't just simply sit in the flow and go through things in a routine fashion because I will not let you. God, I sound like him. As he also stated that it's not easy to be disrupted that way, but it's good to be disrupted that way because it helps him reflect on how he's doing in the classroom and how he is serving students well, which seems pretty accurate to what most educators want for their students they're working with. He also adds that I do bring up things that affect me, and also through his view, he also adds that he believes that whatever I share affects the whole class too, and it brightens up the day and everything. And so that's been a great advantage that I could think of. I know that's a whole lot thrown at you, but I promise you, it's okay to not understand this the first time. I encourage you to be friends with anyone who is autistic, ADHD, ADD, so on and so forth. It's not just those kind of neurological disabilities, but also it applies to OCD, Down syndrome, whatever is under the umbrella. I really thank you guys for taking the time in listening to what I have to say. So please be sure to like this video and subscribe down below to be part of the Glitter Angel family. And please, I've said this before and I'll say it again, please take the time to acknowledge your neurodivergent friends and tell them how lucky they are that they are in your life. It is worthwhile. So I love you guys all so much, and I'll see you in the next vlog/episode. All right, have a good day, everyone. Bye.